Welcome back to the OHSU Effect Inside Health and Science. This morning we're talking with Dr. Eric Orwoll, professor of medicine and the assistant vice president of research at OHSU, and we're talking about clinical trials. So good morning once again.
Good morning.
Let's talk about trials that involve new medications. First of all, explain the role of drug companies in these clinical trials.
Yeah, there are a couple of kinds of clinical trials when new medicines are being developed. One is one might not involve drug companies at all. And so a discovery might come out of a medical school or another laboratory and go all the way through the process of being tested in humans for usefulness. Another kind of trial might come out of a drug company and sponsored by the drug company. So the two are fundamentally different. In any rate, in our country, at least, almost all drugs, essentially all drugs, go through a process of commercialization and end up on the market for sale. So drug companies are an integral process of developing new drugs. The profit motive is an important issue that we all struggle with. And so our challenge is really to do good drug discovery, recognizing that we also need to be cognizant of how the profit motive might be part of the process.
Sure. I was going to ask if a patient should be wary if a trial is sponsored by a drug company. But any questions that a person should ask if that's the case?
I think they should be knowledgeable about who's sponsoring the trial. But again, the process by which clinical trials are done, I think, is very carefully arranged. So even though a drug company might be developing the drug, I think the process that a volunteer goes through is going to be the same one way or the other.
So when you're doing trials involving drugs, you have a group who is taking the medication and then you have a control group, right?
Yep.
So what would you say to a person who wants to receive the medication being tested, but of course there is a chance they'll get the control drug? I mean, how do you balance that out if a person really is interested in this medication?
Yeah, so as I said in our earlier discussion, that kind of thing has to be transparent. And the person has to be very clear about the fact that if there is a control drug or a placebo, they may get that placebo rather than the real drug. And they need to decide whether they're comfortable with that, with being involved in the trial. So some people who really need a drug for a medical condition might not want to be in a trial. Another person might be very comfortable in their situation with the possibility of being in the placebo group. So it depends, and it depends on what the patient wants.
Control treatments aren't always just sugar pills, though, right? What else is there?
Right. Well, in the first place, placebo pills aren't sugar very often anymore. They're just something that doesn't do anything. Sugar does things. But another kind of control might be the current therapies that are available. So if you're developing a new drug, you might compare that new drug to the conventional drug. So that's another kind of control besides a placebo control. In some situation, a placebo control might not be appropriate. For instance, if there is a good treatment for an illness, you might not want to tell somebody with that illness that they're going to get a placebo. It just might not be ethical to do that.
How do trials fit into the overall process of developing a new drug?
Right. So the clinical trial process is an essential part of that. You just can't have new drugs without going through the process of testing them in humans. So we've made dramatic progresses in treating illnesses over the last few years, and we just can't do it without going through a phase of clinical trials. It's absolutely essential, and it's kind of a societal mandate that if we're going to make progress in medicine, all of us have to consider participating in clinical trials.
How does a person learn about clinical trials up at OHSU? How can they get involved?
They can ask their physicians or their clinicians. There is a website at OHSU called Study Participation. If they just Google that, they'll go to some place where all the clinical trials at OHSU, or almost all of them, are listed. There's another web-based tool called Research Match, where people who are interested in clinical trials can sign up to be volunteers. So there's a number of ways to do that.
And just a few seconds left, but if a new therapy makes it all the way through the clinical trial process, what happens next?
Yeah, so then the FDA gets involved. So the clinical trial process is meant to develop the data to show that the drug is beneficial and has few risks. And then the FDA decides whether it gets on the market.
Well, if you're interested in being involved in the research, those websites that you mentioned are also going to be linked to our webpage, ohsueffect.org. You can always call the main line at OHSU as well, 503-494-8311, and they can direct you to the right place. Dr. Eric Orwoll, Professor of Medicine and Assistant Vice President of Research, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Glad to do it.
And next week on the OHSU Effect, we'll talk about travel medicine and what you need to do to protect yourself and your family before going on vacation. This is the OHSU Effect, Inside Health and Science.